I was pouring my second cup of coffee when I saw her marching up my driveway like she owned the place, which, technically speaking through the tyrannical lens of homeowner association logic, she thought she did. The morning sun glinted off her oversized sunglasses, and her blonde bob haircut bounced with each aggressive step. I knew exactly who she was. Everyone in Riverside Meadows knew Susan Patterson, the president of our HOA board and the woman who had made it her personal mission to turn our suburban Phoenix neighborhood into her own private kingdom of beige conformity. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. My shift at Station 47 had ended at 6 that morning, and I had barely gotten 3 hours of sleep. The last thing I needed was her finger pressed against my doorbell for 30 seconds straight, which was her signature move. "Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I assume you know why I'm here." "Good morning to you too, Susan," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my coffee. "Can't say I do." Her lips pursed into a thin line. She pulled out her phone and jabbed at the screen before turning it toward me. The photo showed my driveway from yesterday afternoon. There sat Engine 47, gleaming red in the Arizona sun, parked exactly where I had left it after bringing it home for routine maintenance. "This," she said, shaking the phone slightly, "is a violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Riverside Meadows HOA Covenant. Commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited from being parked in driveways or on any property within the community." I leaned against the door frame. "That's not a commercial vehicle, Susan. That's a city fire engine." "It's a vehicle used for commercial purposes," she countered. "The covenant is very clear. No trucks, no vans, no commercial vehicles of any kind visible from the street. This monstrosity is all three." "It's a fire truck," I said slowly. "I'm a firefighter. I had to bring it home for a few hours to supervise some maintenance work. It was already gone by 8 last night." "Irrelevant. The violation occurred. You'll be receiving a formal fine notice by certified mail within 3 business days. The fine starts at $500 and increases by $100 per day for each subsequent violation." I felt my jaw tighten. "You're fining me $500 for parking a fire truck in my own driveway for 4 hours. The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Xavier. If we make exceptions, the entire system falls apart." She lowered her sunglasses slightly, revealing eyes that seemed to take genuine pleasure in this moment. "Perhaps this will encourage you to review the covenant more carefully. Good day." She turned on her heel and walked back down the driveway, leaving me standing there with cold coffee and rising blood pressure. I had lived in Riverside Meadows for 2 years. My wife Rachel had fallen in love with the house, a beautiful 3-bedroom with a desert landscaped yard. The HOA seemed like a minor annoyance at the time. We had signed the papers, paid our dues, and I had mostly avoided any interaction with the board. That was about to change. 3 days later, just as threatened, a certified letter arrived. I signed for it and opened the envelope to find a formal violation notice printed on HOA letterhead. The language was dense and bureaucratic, but the message was clear. I had violated the covenant. I owed $500. Payment was due within 30 days, or the fine would increase to $750 and potential legal action would be initiated. I called Rachel at her office downtown. She worked as an architect for a firm that specialized in commercial buildings. When I read her the notice, she let out a long sigh. "Nathan, I told you bringing the truck home was going to cause problems," she said. "You know how Susan is. The bay at the station was occupied. The truck needed maintenance. What was I supposed to do, park it on the street? Obviously not. But you could have called me. We could have figured something out." "Like what?" It's a fire truck, not a sedan. There's no secret parking spot for emergency vehicles. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Just pay the fine, it's not worth the fight. $500 for parking in my own driveway. That's insane. Welcome to HOA living. Pay the fine, follow their ridiculous rules, and move on with your life. We can't afford to get into a legal battle over this. She had a point. Legal fees would dwarf the fine. But something about the whole situation gnawed at me. I had spent the last 8 years as a firefighter, the last 3 with Phoenix Fire Department. I had pulled people from burning buildings, performed CPR on strangers, worked through holidays, and missed family dinners because someone needed help. And now, I was being punished for the vehicle. I used to do that job. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. It was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, a bland rectangular building at the entrance to the neighborhood. When I arrived at 7, about 15 other homeowners were already there, seated in folding chairs facing a long table where Susan and her 4 board members sat like judges. I recognized 2 of the board members. Margaret Chen lived 3 houses down from me, a retired teacher who mostly kept to herself. The other was Robert Flynn, a real estate agent whose face was plastered on bus benches all over Phoenix. The remaining 2 board members were strangers, but they all shared the same expression of self-important authority. Susan called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. They worked through the agenda with bureaucratic efficiency. Landscaping reports, financial statements, discussion of repainting the community center. Then came new business. "We've had several covenant violations this month," Susan announced. "I want to remind everyone that these rules exist to maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. When one homeowner violates the covenant, it affects all of us." I raised my hand. Susan's eyes found me immediately. "Yes, Mr. Xavier," I stood up. "I'd like to discuss my recent violation notice. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. You parked a commercial vehicle in your driveway. The violation is documented with photographic evidence. It was a city fire truck that I had to bring home for a few hours. I'm a firefighter with Phoenix Fire Department. The truck needed maintenance, and I supervised the work at my house because the bay at the station was occupied. The covenant doesn't distinguish between types of commercial vehicles," Susan replied. "A violation is a violation, but it's not a commercial vehicle in the traditional sense. It's an emergency response vehicle. I'm a public servant doing my job." Margaret Chen leaned forward slightly. "I think Nathan has a point, Susan. The spirit of the commercial vehicle rule is to prevent contractors and businesses from using the neighborhood as a parking lot. A firefighter bringing home a truck for a few hours seems different. The covenant doesn't have a spirit, Margaret. It has specific language that we're obligated to enforce." Susan's voice had taken on a harder edge. "If we start making exceptions based on feelings, where does it end? Next week, someone will want to park their work van overnight. Then someone else will claim their food truck is different because it's for catering events. The rules exist for a reason." "I'm not asking for a permanent exception," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm asking for basic common sense. I parked a fire truck in my driveway for 4 hours to make sure it was properly maintained so it could save lives. That's not the same as running a business out of my garage." Robert Flynn spoke up for the first time. "I actually think Susan's right on this one. I mean, I appreciate what you do, Nathan. Firefighters are heroes. But if we bend the rules for you, we set a precedent. The covenant is a legally binding contract. We can't just ignore parts we don't like." I looked around the room. A few homeowners were nodding. Others looked uncomfortable. One older man in the back raised his hand. "I think this is ridiculous," he said. The man's a firefighter. He's out there risking his life for all of us, and we're going to fine him for parking his truck at home. That's the kind of petty nonsense that gives HOAs a bad name." "Thank you for your opinion, Mr. Carlson," Susan said coldly. "But the board's decision stands. The fine is valid. Mr. Xavier has 30 days to pay." The meeting continued, but I barely heard the rest of it. I sat there fuming, watching Susan and her board shuffle papers and discuss paint colors while my $500 fine hung in the air like smoke from a 4-alarm fire. After the meeting ended, Margaret Chen approached me in the parking lot. "I'm sorry, Nathan," she said. "I tried." But Susan has the other board members in her pocket. Robert always votes with her, and the other two are afraid of her. "Why is she like this?" I asked. "What does she get out of being so controlling?" Margaret shrugged. "Power, I guess. She used to work in corporate management before she retired. I think she misses having people beneath her. The HOA gives her that feeling again. So I'm just supposed to pay the fine. Unless you want to fight it in court, but that'll cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. Trust me, people have tried." Susan keeps a lawyer on retainer specifically for HOA disputes. She's won every case. I drove home feeling defeated. Rachel was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. She took one look at my face and knew how the meeting had gone. "They didn't budge?" she asked. "Not even a little." Susan basically said rules are rules, and if I don't like it, I can take her to court. Which we can't afford to do. I agreed. Rachel came over and hugged me. "I know it's unfair, but sometimes you have to pick your battles. Pay the fine. Don't bring the truck home again. We'll get through this." I wanted to take her advice. I really did. But the next week, everything changed. I was at the station on a Tuesday afternoon, just finishing up some paperwork in the office when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer it. "Hello, is this Nathan Xavier?" A man's voice, professional and clipped, speaking. "Mr. Xavier, this is Dennis Kowalski with the Arizona Department of Public Safety. I'm calling regarding a matter involving your homeowner association." My stomach dropped. "What kind of matter?" "We've received multiple complaints about the Riverside Meadows HOA board, specifically regarding financial irregularities. Your name came up in our initial investigation as someone who recently had a dispute with the board. Would you be willing to come in and speak with us?" Financial irregularities. What does that mean? I'd rather not discuss details over the phone. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. I agreed and hung up, my mind racing. What kind of financial irregularities? I paid my HOA dues every month like clockwork. What did that have to do with me? The next morning, I drove to the Arizona Department of Public Safety office in downtown Phoenix. Dennis Kowalski turned out to be a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much bureaucratic corruption. He led me to a small conference room where another investigator, a woman named Patricia Alvarez, was waiting. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Xavier," Kowalski said. "We're investigating the Riverside Meadows HOA board for potential embezzlement and fraud. Several homeowners have filed complaints about unexplained fee increases, lack of financial transparency, and unauthorized expenditures. When we started looking into the records, we found significant discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked. Patricia pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Over the past 3 years, the HOA has collected approximately $800,000 in annual dues from the 212 homes in your community. That's about $400,000 per year. According to the filed financial statements, this money goes toward maintenance, landscaping, insurance, and reserve funds." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. The problem is, Kowalski continued, we can only account for about 60% of that money. The rest seems to have vanished into vague categories like consulting fees, management expenses, and administrative costs. When we dug deeper, we found that Susan Patterson has been writing checks to shell companies that don't seem to exist. I felt my eyes widen. Are you saying she's been stealing from the HOA? That's what we're trying to determine. We need to talk to as many homeowners as possible to establish a pattern. You recently had a dispute with the board, correct? I told them about the Firetruck incident, the fine, and the board meeting. Patricia took notes while I talked. $500 for parking a fire truck in your driveway for 4 hours, Kowalski said when I finished. That seems excessive. Susan said it was in the covenant. We've reviewed the covenant. The commercial vehicle restriction is real, but the fine structure is interesting. According to the covenant, fines for first-time violations should start at $50, not $500. The board has discretion to increase fines for repeated violations, but $500 for a first offense seems arbitrary. So she just made up the amount. It's possible. We've found several instances where the board imposed fines that don't match the covenant's language. The money from these fines goes into the HOA's general fund, which Susan controls as president. It's another potential revenue stream for embezzlement. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. So what happens now? We continue investigating. If we find sufficient evidence of fraud, we'll present the case to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. In the meantime, I'd advise not paying that fine. If Susan is engaging in criminal activity, any money you pay her could be part of the evidence. I left the meeting feeling strange. On one hand, I was vindicated. Susan wasn't just petty and power-hungry. She was apparently a criminal. On the other hand, I lived in a neighborhood run by someone who was stealing from hundreds of families. The whole situation felt surreal. I told Rachel everything that night. Her reaction was stronger than I expected. I knew something was off about her, Rachel said, pacing the kitchen. Remember last year when she wanted to increase the dues by 30%? She said it was for necessary repairs, but I never saw any major work being done. The investigators said they can't account for 40% of the HOA's money over 3 years. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh my God. Nathan, we need to talk to our neighbors. If this is real, everyone needs to know. The investigators said not to interfere with their investigation. I'm not talking about interfering. I'm talking about warning people. What if Susan tries to disappear with the money? She had a point. Over the next few days, we quietly reached out to neighbors we trusted. The reactions were mixed. Some people were shocked and angry. Others were skeptical, defending Susan as a strict but honest board president. A few didn't seem to care as long as their property values stayed stable, but word spread quickly in a neighborhood like Riverside Meadows. By the end of the week, everyone knew something was happening. I started noticing people giving Susan cold stares when she drove past. Someone spray painted the word thief on the community center wall, though it was quickly removed. Then things escalated. The following Tuesday, I was home on my day off when I heard shouting outside. I looked out the window to see Susan standing in my driveway, her face red with fury. Behind her was a Phoenix police patrol car. I went outside. The officer, a young guy named Ramirez who I recognized from calls we'd responded to together, gave me an apologetic look. Nathan, Miss Patterson here claims you've been harassing her and spreading false accusations about her character. She wants to file a complaint. I haven't been harassing anyone, I said. I spoke to some state investigators about HOA financial issues. That's not harassment. That's cooperation with a legitimate investigation. Susan pointed at me with a shaking finger. You've been going around the neighborhood telling lies about me. You're trying to turn everyone against me because you're mad about your stupid fine. The fine you illegally inflated from $50 to $500, I shot back. Yeah, I'm mad about that, but I didn't lie about anything. The state is investigating you for embezzlement. That's a fact, not an accusation. This is slander. I'm going to sue you for everything you have. Ramirez held up his hands. Okay, everyone calm down. Mr. Xavier, have you made any threats toward Miss Patterson? No. Have you trespassed on her property or contacted her directly? No. I've talked to my neighbors about a criminal investigation. That's protected speech. Ramirez turned to Susan. Madam, I understand you're upset, but from what I'm hearing, Mr. Xavier hasn't done anything illegal. If there's a state investigation happening, he has the right to discuss it. If you believe he's defaming you, that's a civil matter, not a criminal one. This is ridiculous, Susan spat. You're all protecting each other. Typical. She stormed off to her car and peeled out of the driveway with unnecessary aggression. Ramirez watched her go and shook his head. What's really going on, Nathan? I gave him the abbreviated version. His expression grew more serious as I talked. That explains some things, he said when I finished. We've had 3 domestic disturbance calls from this neighborhood in the past month. That's unusual for an area this quiet. People are stressed about something. Probably worried about their life savings being stolen by their HOA president. If the investigation turns up evidence of crimes, we'll get involved. Until then, try to keep your head down, and maybe don't park any more fire trucks in your driveway. He said the last part with a slight grin. I managed to smile back. The investigation continued through May and into June. The Arizona summer heat descended on Phoenix like a hammer, and tempers in Riverside Meadows grew shorter. More homeowners started demanding financial transparency from the board. Susan responded by canceling all board meetings indefinitely, citing security concerns. This only made people angrier. A group of homeowners, led by a retired accountant named Thomas Greenfield, started their own review of the HOA's publicly available financial documents. What they found was damning. Large chunks of money categorized as landscaping expenses that didn't match up with actual work done. Payments to a consulting firm that had no online presence, no business license, and an address that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. Thomas compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to every homeowner in the community. The day those emails went out, my phone didn't stop ringing. People wanted to know what was happening, what they could do, whether they'd ever see their money again. I didn't have answers. All I could do was tell them to cooperate with the state investigators if they were contacted. In the middle of all this chaos, I had to deal with my own job. Station 47 was short-staffed due to budget cuts, which meant longer shifts and more stress. One particularly brutal night in late June, we responded to a house fire in Scottsdale that turned into a 3-alarm situation. A family of 5 was trapped on the 2nd floor. We got them all out, but one of the kids, a girl about 7 years old, had severe smoke inhalation. I rode in the ambulance with her to the hospital, holding her hand and talking to her while the paramedics worked. She survived, but it was close. I got home at dawn, exhausted and emotionally drained. Rachel was already up, getting ready for work. She took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. "Rough night?" she asked. "Kid almost died. She's okay now, but it was bad. You saved her. We saved her, the whole crew." Rachel made me breakfast while I showered. As I was eating, she brought up something I'd been trying not to think about. "Your fire truck fine is due next week," she said. "Have you decided what to do?" The investigators told me not to pay it. But if you don't pay it, Susan will escalate. She could put a lien on the house. Let her try. If she's about to be arrested for embezzlement, a lien is the least of her problems. And if the charges don't stick, if the investigation falls apart, I didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was, I was gambling. I was betting that the state had enough evidence to bring charges against Susan before she could cause me more trouble. It was a risky bet. The deadline came and went. I didn't pay the fine. 3 days later, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that the fine had increased to $750 due to non-payment. Additionally, I was being assessed administrative fees of $200. Total amount due, $950. I called Dennis Kowalski. They're escalating the fines, I told him. How much longer is this investigation going to take? These things move slowly, he said. But we're getting close. We've subpoenaed the HOA's bank records and Susan's personal accounts. If the money is there, we'll find it. And if I end up with a lien on my house in the meantime, that won't happen. Trust me. I wasn't sure I did trust him, but I didn't have many options. July brought more heat and more tension. Susan stopped answering emails from homeowners. The HOA's website went offline. Landscaping services stopped showing up, leaving the common areas brown and neglected. The pool, which was supposed to be open all summer, remained locked behind a chain-link fence. People started talking about dissolving the HOA entirely. Thomas Greenfield looked into the process and discovered it required a 75% vote from all homeowners. Getting that many people to agree on anything seemed impossible, but the effort gained traction. Petitions circulated. Meetings were held in neighbors' backyards since the community center was no longer available. I attended one of these meetings at Thomas's house. About 40 people showed up, crowding into his living room and spilling out onto his patio. The anger was palpable. "We've paid our dues for years," one woman said. "And for what? So Susan Patterson can buy herself a new car and a vacation home." "We don't know that for sure," someone else countered. "Not until the investigation is complete." "What investigation? Nothing's happened." She's still living in her house, still collecting dues, still acting like she runs this place. Thomas raised his hands for quiet. "I spoke with the state investigators yesterday. They assured me that charges are coming. But these cases take time. Financial fraud is complicated. They need ironclad evidence before they can arrest her. In the meantime, our neighborhood is falling apart," another man said. "Have you seen the entrance? The landscaping is dead. There's graffiti on the community center. This place is starting to look like a slum." "We can fix that ourselves," Thomas said. "We don't need the HOA board to organize volunteer work crews. If people want to pitch in, we can take care of the common areas until this mess is resolved." The idea gained immediate support. Over the next few weeks, homeowners organized workdays. People brought their own tools, plants, and paint. We cleaned up the entrance, repainted the community center, and restored some semblance of order to the neighborhood. It felt good to work alongside neighbors toward a common goal. It reminded me of the camaraderie at the fire station. Susan, predictably, sent out a mass email threatening legal action against anyone who performed unauthorized maintenance on HOA property. Nobody paid attention. Her authority had evaporated. Then, on a sweltering Thursday afternoon in late July, everything came to a head. I was at the station, working on equipment maintenance with my crew, when Chief Morrison called me into his office. Chief Morrison was a no-nonsense guy in his late 50s, a career firefighter who had worked his way up from rookie to chief over 3 decades. He didn't usually call people in unless something serious was happening. "Xavier, Close the door, he said when I entered. I did, feeling a familiar anxiety creeping up my spine. I got a strange call this morning, the chief continued. A woman named Susan Patterson contacted me. Said she's the president of your HOA and wanted to discuss your employment status. My jaw clenched. What did she want to know? She claimed you've been using city equipment for personal purposes. Specifically, she said you've been taking fire trucks home without authorization and parking them in your driveway. Chief, I brought Engine 47 home one time, back in April, for 4 hours to supervise maintenance. You approved it. We needed to replace the pump, and the bay was occupied by Engine 23, which was getting a full overhaul. I documented everything properly. I know. I checked the records before I called you in. Everything was by the book. I told Miss Patterson that, and she seemed upset. Then she asked if I knew you were under investigation for fraud. I felt my blood pressure spike. That's a lie. She's the one under investigation. The Arizona Department of Public Safety is looking into embezzlement charges against her and the HOA board. Chief Morrison nodded slowly. That's what I figured. I did some checking after she called, talked to a buddy of mine who works with DPS. He confirmed there's an active investigation into your HOA. He also mentioned your name came up as a witness, not a suspect. Susan's trying to discredit me because I've been cooperating with the investigators. That's what it looks like. I wanted to give you a heads up. If she's willing to lie to a fire chief about one of his firefighters, she's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. I appreciate the warning, Chief. One more thing. Do you still have that fine hanging over your head, the one for parking the truck at your house? Yeah. It's up to almost $1,000 now with late fees. Chief Morrison opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a business card. This is my brother-in-law. He's a lawyer, specializes in HOA disputes. Give him a call. Tell him I sent you. He owes me a favor, so he'll give you a discount. I took the card, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. Thanks, Chief. But honestly, I'm hoping this whole thing resolves itself when the state arrests Susan. Don't count on timing working in your favor. Cover your bases. That's an order. I left his office and called the lawyer, whose name was David Hernandez. He agreed to meet with me that evening. His office was in Temp, a modest suite in a building near Arizona State University. David turned out to be a friendly guy in his 40s with a relaxed demeanor that put me at ease immediately. I laid out the whole situation for him. The fire truck incident, the inflated fine, the investigation into Susan, the escalating harassment. He listened carefully, taking occasional notes. You've got a few options here, David said when I finished. First, you could pay the fine and let it go. Based on what you're telling me, Susan's probably going to be arrested soon, and the HOA will likely dissolve or restructure. The fine might become meaningless. That's a lot of maybes. True. Second option, you could fight the fine in court. We'd argue that it violates the covenant's actual language about fines and penalties. We'd probably win, but it would take months and cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. So I'm screwed either way. Not necessarily. Third option, which I think is your best bet. We send a letter to the HOA board invoking your right to dispute the fine through binding arbitration. It's cheaper and faster than court. Most HOA covenants have an arbitration clause. Do you have a copy of yours? I pulled it up on my phone and forwarded it to him. David scanned through it quickly. Perfect. Section 14 allows for arbitration of disputes. We file a request, they have to respond within 30 days. An arbitrator reviews the evidence and makes a binding decision. Given that the fine amount doesn't match the covenant, I'd say you have a strong case. How much would this cost me? Arbitration filing fee is around $300. My fee would be about $500 for drafting the request and representing you at the hearing. So $800 total. Less than the fine, and you'd have a good chance of winning. It still felt wrong to pay money to fight an unjust fine, but David's plan made sense. I agreed, and he said he'd have the arbitration request ready by the end of the week. I went home feeling slightly better. Rachel was thrilled when I told her about the meeting with David. "Finally, we're actually doing something about this," she said. "I was worried we were just going to roll over and let Susan push us around." The chief made a good point. "We can't assume the state investigation will resolve everything. We need to protect ourselves." The next week brought a development I hadn't anticipated. I was home on a rare Friday evening, grilling burgers in the backyard, when a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. Two people got out, Dennis Kowalski and Patricia Alvarez. They looked serious. I met them at the front door. "Evening, Nathan," Dennis said. "Sorry to bother you at home. We need to talk." I invited them inside. Rachel came out of the kitchen and I introduced her. "We're wrapping up our investigation," Patricia said once we were all seated in the living room. "We wanted to update you before the news breaks. Tomorrow morning, we're executing search warrants on Susan Patterson's home and the HOA's financial records. We have enough evidence to charge her with embezzlement, fraud, and forgery." I felt a surge of vindication. So it's really happening. It's really happening. Over the past 3 years, she's stolen approximately $320,000 from the HOA. She created fake invoices from shell companies, wrote herself checks for non-existent consulting work, and inflated contractor bills before pocketing the difference. It's textbook embezzlement. "What about the other board members?" Rachel asked. "Were they involved?" "We don't think so." Susan kept tight control over the finances. The other board members signed off on things without really understanding what they were approving. They were negligent, maybe, but not criminal. "What happens now?" I asked. "Susan will be arrested tomorrow morning. She'll be charged, arraigned, and released on bail pending trial. The case will take months to work through the system, but we have solid evidence. She'll likely take a plea deal. And the money she stole, that's the complicated part. Some of it we can trace and potentially recover. But she spent a lot of it. New car, remodeling her house, a vacation property in Sedona. The HOA might be able to recover some assets through civil litigation, but you're not going to get all of it back. It wasn't the perfect ending I had hoped for, but it was justice." Dennis and Patricia left after giving me some paperwork to review. That night, Rachel and I stayed up late, talking about what this meant for the neighborhood. "You think people will want to dissolve the HOA after this?" she asked. "Probably. But starting over won't be easy. We'll need new bylaws, new leadership, a whole new structure. It could take years. At least Susan will be gone. Yeah, at least there's that." The next morning, I was at the station when my phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. The news had spread quickly. Susan had been arrested at 6 in the morning. Multiple police cars and state investigators descended on her house. She was led out in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their yards. Someone recorded video and posted it online, where it quickly went viral in local community groups. The fallout was immediate and dramatic. By noon, the remaining HOA board members had resigned. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen pending the criminal investigation. Local news crews showed up in Riverside Meadows, interviewing residents about the scandal. I declined to go on camera, but Thomas Greenfield spoke extensively about the community's ordeal. That evening, I attended an emergency neighborhood meeting. Nearly every homeowner showed up, packing Thomas's backyard beyond capacity. The mood was a mixture of anger, relief, and uncertainty. Thomas stood on his patio to address the crowd. "By now, everyone knows what happened," he began. "Susan Patterson has been arrested and charged with embezzling over $300,000 from our community. The other board members have resigned. The HOA, for all practical purposes, no longer exists in any functional form." A woman in the crowd spoke up. "What does that mean for our property, the common areas, the pool?" "That's what we need to figure out," Thomas replied. "Legally, the HOA still exists as an entity. The covenant is still binding, but we have no leadership, no access to the remaining funds, and no clear path forward. We need to decide as a community what we want to do." "I say we dissolve the whole thing," someone called out. "HOAs are nothing but trouble." "Without an HOA, who maintains the common areas?" Another person countered. "Who enforces property standards? This neighborhood could turn into a free-for-all." The debate went on for over an hour. Some people wanted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Others wanted to reform it with better oversight and transparency. A third group didn't care as long as their property values didn't tank. Eventually, Thomas proposed forming an interim committee to explore options and report back to the community in 30 days. The proposal passed by a show of hands. I found myself volunteered for the committee despite my protests that I knew nothing about HOA governance. "You stood up to Susan when everyone else was afraid," Thomas told me afterward. "That takes guts. We need people like you involved in rebuilding." Over the next few weeks, the committee met regularly. We consulted with lawyers, studied other HOA structures, and gathered input from homeowners. It was tedious, bureaucratic work, the opposite of the adrenaline-fueled chaos of firefighting, but it mattered. Meanwhile, my personal dispute with the defunct HOA quietly resolved itself. David Hernandez had filed the arbitration request before Susan's arrest. In the chaos that followed, no one from the former board responded to the filing. The arbitrator ruled in my favor by default. The $950 fine was voided, and I was awarded $800 in legal fees, which would supposedly come from the HOA's remaining assets once the criminal investigation concluded. I wasn't holding my breath on actually receiving that money, but the principle felt important. In August, Susan Patterson appeared in Maricopa County Superior Court for her arraignment. I attended, sitting in the gallery with about 20 other homeowners from Riverside Meadows. Susan looked smaller somehow, diminished without her authoritative posture and designer sunglasses. She pleaded not guilty, but everyone knew it was a formality. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her lawyer negotiated with the prosecutor over the following weeks. In September, Susan changed her plea to guilty on 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. In exchange, the prosecution dropped several other charges. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $320,000, though nobody expected she'd be able to pay that amount. The day of her sentencing, I was back in court. This time, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Thomas Greenfield spoke about the damage to the community's trust and finances. An elderly couple talked about how they'd scrimped and saved to afford their home, only to have their dues stolen by someone they'd trusted. When the judge asked if anyone else wanted to speak, I stood up. "Your Honor, my name is Xavier. I'm a firefighter with Phoenix Fire Department and a homeowner in Riverside Meadows. Miss Patterson fined me $500 for parking a fire truck in my driveway for 4 hours while it underwent maintenance. When I questioned the fine, she harassed me, tried to turn my neighbors against me, and even called my fire chief to try to get me in trouble at work." I paused, collecting my thoughts. But the fine isn't what bothers me most. What bothers me is how she abused a position of trust. Homeowner associations exist to serve their communities. They're supposed to maintain property values, yes, but also to build neighborhoods where people feel safe and respected. Miss Patterson turned our HOA into her personal fiefdom. She used fear and intimidation to control people. And when that wasn't enough, she stole from them. I looked directly at Susan, who kept her eyes on the table in front of her. I've spent my career as a firefighter helping people in their worst moments. I've seen what real emergencies look like. This wasn't an emergency. This was calculated, deliberate theft over years. I hope the court's sentence reflects the seriousness of that betrayal. The judge thanked me and moved on to other business. After Susan was led away by bailiffs, several neighbors thanked me for speaking. It felt like closure, finally. The committee I served on continued its work through the fall. By October, we had developed a proposal for a reformed HOA structure. The new bylaws included mandatory financial audits, term limits for board members, regular open meetings, and clear processes for dispute resolution. We also reduced annual dues by 20%, since Susan's inflated budget requirements were no longer necessary. In November, we held a community-wide vote on the proposal. It required a 2/3 majority to pass. The meeting where we counted ballots was nerve-wracking. But in the end, 74% of homeowners voted in favor. Riverside Meadows would have an HOA again, but one built on transparency and accountability rather than authoritarian control. Elections for the new board were held in December. Thomas Greenfield was elected president. Margaret Chen agreed to serve as treasurer, bringing her careful eye for detail to the finances. I was asked to run for a position but declined. I'd done my part. Now I wanted to focus on my actual job and my marriage, both of which had been neglected during the chaos. Christmas came and went. Rachel and I hosted her family at our house, and for the first time in months, I felt relaxed in my own home. The neighborhood looked good again. The common areas were maintained by a new landscaping company chosen through a transparent bidding process. The pool was scheduled to reopen in the spring. Property values, which had dipped during the scandal, were recovering on New Year's Eve. Rachel and I sat on our back patio, watching fireworks light up the Phoenix sky in the distance. "Quite a year," she said, leaning against me. "That's an understatement." "Do you regret not paying that first fine, just to avoid all the drama?" I thought about it. "No. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's expensive and exhausting. If I just paid and moved on, Susan would still be stealing from people. She needed to be stopped." "My hero," Rachel said with a smile. "I'm no hero. I'm just a guy who got mad about a parking fine. You're more than that. You showed this whole neighborhood that one person speaking up can make a difference." The new year brought a sense of normalcy I'd almost forgotten. My shifts at Station 47 continued their regular rhythm of training, maintenance, and emergency calls. The new HOA board operated smoothly, publishing detailed financial reports every quarter and holding open meetings where homeowners could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. In February, I received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a check for $800 from the Riverside Meadows HOA, along with a note from Thomas Greenfield explaining that the arbitration ruling had finally been processed. The HOA's remaining assets, after being released from the criminal investigation, were being used to settle outstanding debts. I deposited the check and took Rachel out to a nice dinner to celebrate. "What should we do with the rest?" she asked over wine and pasta. "The rest?" "We got $800 back, but you would have paid $1,000 in fines if you'd given in to Susan." That's $1,800 we didn't lose. Let's do something fun with it. We ended up taking a long weekend trip to San Diego. We walked on the beach, visited the zoo, and ate too much seafood. It felt like a reward for surviving the craziest year of our lives. In March, I was at the station when a new rookie arrived for his first shift. His name was Kyle, fresh out of the fire academy with the nervous energy of someone who wasn't sure if he belonged yet. Chief Morrison assigned him to shadow me for the day. "Xavier will show you the ropes," the chief said. "He's one of our best. Listen to what he tells you." As I walked Kyle through the station, explaining equipment and procedures, he asked about a photo on the wall. It showed our crew standing in front of Engine 47 after a successful rescue at a multi-car accident. "That's a good rig," Kyle said. "You take care of it well. We all do. The truck is only as good as the crew that maintains it. Can you take them home? For maintenance, I mean," I laughed. "That's a complicated question. Let me tell you a story about HOAs, embezzlement, and why you should always read the fine print before buying a house." Kyle listened with growing amazement as I recounted the saga. By the end, he was shaking his head in disbelief. "That actually happened?" he asked. "Every word?" The moral of the story is, document everything, stand up for yourself, and never underestimate the capacity of people in minor positions of power to abuse that power. "I'll remember that." "Good. Now let's check the hoses. If we get a call, you need to know this equipment inside and out." We spent the rest of the shift training. That night, we responded to 2 medical calls and a small kitchen fire. Nothing dramatic, just the regular work of keeping people safe. As we drove back to the station in the early morning hours, I felt grateful for the simplicity of it. My job was clear: respond to emergencies, help people, go home. The HOA drama felt like a distant memory now, something that had happened to a different version of me. But the lessons stuck with me. I learned that communities are only as strong as the people willing to fight for them. I learned that corruption thrives in silence and apathy. And I learned that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with hoses and axes, but with paperwork, persistence, and the refusal to back down when something is wrong. By April, Riverside Meadows had fully stabilized under its new leadership. The pool opened on schedule. A neighborhood block party was held to celebrate, with families gathering for barbecue and music. Kids splashed in the pool while adults chatted and laughed. It felt like a real community again, not a collection of people living in fear of arbitrary fines and authoritarian rules. I stood at the edge of the party with Rachel, watching the scene. "You helped build this," she said. "You know that, right?" "I just didn't want to pay an unfair fine." It was more than that. You showed people they didn't have to accept being pushed around. That matters. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was just stubborn. Either way, I was glad we'd fought back. Thomas Greenfield approached us with a beer in each hand, offering us one. "To surviving Susan Patterson," he said, raising his bottle. "To surviving," I agreed, clinking bottles with him and Rachel. "I heard she might get out early for good behavior," Thomas added. 2 years instead of 4. "That's up to the parole board," I said. "But even if she does, she's banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona as part of her sentence, and she still owes restitution she'll probably never be able to pay. Justice isn't perfect, but it's something." "It's something," I agreed. The party continued into the evening. As the sun set over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. My home was truly my home again, not a source of stress and conflict. My neighborhood was a place I wanted to be, not a battlefield. Rachel squeezed my hand. "Ready to go home?" "Yeah, let's go home." We walked back to our house, just 2 blocks from the community center. The streets were quiet and clean. Lights glowed warmly from windows. It looked like every other suburban neighborhood in America, which was exactly what it should be. That night, I sat on my patio with a cold drink, listening to the distant sounds of the block party winding down. My mind wandered back over everything that had happened. The fire truck, the fine, Susan's harassment, the investigation, the arrest, the trial, the rebuilding. It had been exhausting and infuriating and at times terrifying, but we'd made it through. The system, flawed as it was, had eventually worked. The criminal got punished. The community got a fresh start. The good guys won more or less. I thought about all the calls I'd responded to as a firefighter, the people I'd helped, the lives I'd saved. That was important work, work that mattered. But standing up to Susan Patterson mattered too, in a different way. Sometimes heroism isn't about running into burning buildings. Sometimes it's about refusing to pay an unjust fine and dealing with the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Chief Morrison. Need you in early tomorrow. 3-alarm warehouse fire this afternoon, still investigating. Might need extra hands. I texted back confirmation and finished my drink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fires to fight, new people to help. That was the job I'd signed up for, the work I loved. But tonight, I was just Nathan Xavier, homeowner in Riverside Meadows, sitting in my backyard without a single HOA fine hanging over my head. It felt like victory.